Grab a Bible and meet me in John chapter 2 today. John chapter 2. If you need a Bible to borrow, you don't have one you can power up or open up, grab one of the ones around you, go to page 724 of those. Page 724 of those. And if you don't own a Bible or the one that you have when you open it up, it seems like it's English, but you don't understand any of the language in it, feel free to borrow this one for today, but keep it too. And in fact, if you've got one, the one you just grabbed is kind of a weathered copy. There are racks in the back with brand new copies. If you need one to keep, take it. We'd love for it to be our gift for you and to you. We'd love to buy more for that reason. So John chapter 2, page 724 of these Bibles is where we're going to be today. John chapter 2. I don't know if you've ever thought about it before, but there's this moment between a really great question and its answer where a whole world hangs in the balance. First time I ever felt it, I was in 6th grade and had a really great question that I needed to ask, an important question. And so I got my very best notebook paper that I had and my very best pencil that I had. I sharpened it as perfectly as I could sharpen the pencil, and with my very best handwriting, I started to write out the question. And to my memory, it took me 5 different drafts before I finally had the question asked exactly the way I intended to ask it. And I'd written it down, and I folded it up, folded it into a nice little triangle, and then stuffed the end into the side, and I handed it to my friend Mark Jefferson, to hand to our friend Catherine Bay, to hand to Catherine's friend Mindy Nelson. And she unwrapped the note and looked at the question, and my world hung in the balance. See, even at 6th grade, I knew that the way that she answered the question was going to determine something about our relationship from this point on. It was going to define our identities, hers and mine, from here on out. It was going to determine the next steps that I took, that we took from here. Really great question. Will you go out with me? Check yes or no. And as I waited for the answer, my world hung in the balance. She said yes. Now, it seems trivial, probably for you and me at this point. It didn't seem trivial to me in the moment. And it's not the last question kind of like that I've ever asked in my life. You either. Lots of moments in life, big moments in life, get lived in the moments between the asking of a question and its answer. Job opportunities, job offers. In my world, there was a marriage proposal. Started with a question, waited for an answer, and in the middle, my world hung in the balance. All kinds of big situations and circumstances that we navigate through life, they start with a question, they end with an answer, and in the middle, the world hangs in the balance, especially when it comes to our most important relationships. Have you noticed that? So is it any wonder that Jesus, when he comes onto the scene, he asked so many questions? Somebody counted 307 different questions that Jesus asked on the earth. Now think about that. I mean, most of us, even if you don't believe everything that everybody believes about who Jesus is and why he came, at least agree that he was a great teacher. Isn't it the job of teachers to answer all of the questions? And yet Jesus seems to have given direct answers to almost half the number of questions that he asked. I think he did it because he knows in the moment between a really great question and its answers, our worlds hang in the balance. Because every single moment like that is an invitation for us to consider our relationship, to define our identity and who we believe that he is, to determine some next steps from a place like this moment as soon as we give our answer to his question. Over the next several weeks together, we're going to look at some of the biggest questions that Jesus asked. But here's what I think we're going to see as we look at them. Even the way that most of the questions are worded, Jesus wants people around. He wants us to know they aren't just questions that were directed to people long ago, far away in another land. They're unanswered questions that he wants us to answer. Questions that he's still asking of people like us today. And as we lean in, I really don't think I'm overstating this. In the moment between Jesus asking the question and our answer, our world hangs in the balance. Got you in John chapter 2 this morning. We pick up the story in John chapter 2 is about 30 years after the Christmas story. So the shepherds and the angels and the wise men, they've all gone back to regularly scheduled programming. Jesus has spent the last 30 years growing up, and then he spent a little bit of time as the assistant to the regional manager of Joseph's carpentry shop. But now it's time to show the world who he is, why he's come, and what he wants to do. It's time to declare that he's God in flesh, the rescuer sent from God to bring flourishing to every corner of the earth and the people who live there. So just think about that for a second. Imagine you're advising Jesus in this moment. Like, this is the moment to step out of obscurity and into the public spotlight. This is the moment to announce who you are and why you've come, for everybody to form their first impressions of you. And you only get one opportunity, the first impression. So when Jesus steps out to announce that he's the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, how would you advise him to mark the moment? Probably some ad buys. Probably a media blitz. You'd probably have him descend on an escalator in Truth Tower for him to announce his candidacy as King of Kings and Lord of Lords for all of the cameras who are set up and ready to mark the moment. I don't know how you would have set that moment up if you were advising Jesus. It wouldn't have been like this. John chapter 2, beginning in verse 1, look what happens. John's writing, and he tells us this, on the third day. Okay, so you got to understand, in this moment, John, who's an eyewitness of Jesus' life, and a whole lot of John's friends have just been introduced to Jesus 3 days ago. And he's picking up the story from where he's starting to see it. He says, on the third day after he's met Jesus, along with some of his friends, he says this, on the third day, a wedding took place in Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. Okay, we don't know whose wedding it was. We just know it was a wedding. Jesus and his mom and his disciples had all been invited. Those days, weddings were a lot bigger deal than even your wedding was to you if you're married, or some of the weddings that you've been to. Picture the biggest wedding that you've ever been to in your life. Weddings in the first century were bigger than that. Okay, they were whole community affairs. Everybody from the community would roll out to be a part of the wedding. It was a multi-day event. It's not like ceremony, dinner at the venue, dancing afterwards. Everybody goes on about their life from there. This was many days. In fact, the whole event was designed to display in front of the whole community that the groom was ready to take care of this bride. So the more extravagant the party was, the longer the party lasted, the bigger the statement the groom was making about how prepared he was for this moment and all of the moments ahead. We don't know how far they are into the party. We don't know how long the party was supposed to last. All we know is that at some point in the celebration, Jesus' mother Mary realizes there's a gigantic problem. We don't even know how she realized it. Maybe the murmur had started to spread throughout the crowd that was present there at the wedding. Maybe she had some insider information. She was there in the kitchen, knew some of the people that were working there. We don't know. But look what she says. Verse 3. John chapter 2. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." Max Lucado says that this is the very first prayer directed specifically at Jesus in the entire Bible. I love that. Ain't none of you got that cross-stitched on a pillow, right? Grandma made you a pillow. It said, Our Father, which art in heaven, right? Or thy will be done. I want a pillow that says, they have no more wine. Notice it's not that they're starting to run low on wine. It's not that they've looked at the people that showed up versus the people that RSVP'd and they think they're maybe going to be running low on wine. The wine's gone. Okay, which is a bummer for sure, but you got to ask the question at the beginning of the story, how big a deal is this really? I mean, I've been to a lot of weddings, done a lot of weddings. I've been to weddings where the wine's run out in the wedding. And it happens for all kinds of different reasons. More people show up than RSVP'd to show up. The distributor left a case or two of wine back at the place that they were supposed to bring it. There was a miscalculation along the way. People overconsumed what the host thought that they would consume. A lot of reasons for it to happen. I've been present when it happens. Most of the time when it happens in our day, it just means a groomsman goes to specs, refills, and saves the day, and everything's okay from there. Or people just drink something else, like settle for punch. It's not that big a deal. How big a deal is this moment for us? Well, it's not that big a deal for us. But remember the significance of this moment. Remember what you already know about a moment like this. In a shame-based culture, this groom finds himself in a moment where the party is going to come to a screeching halt. Why don't the groomsmen go buy more? Why doesn't somebody just provide more? Well, the only answer at a moment like this, in a situation like this, is they can't. And a shame-based culture, this is a big deal for this groom. What this means for this guy is that he's living in a moment that he and his brand new wife will never, ever, ever live out. They haven't even made it to their honeymoon yet. He's about to publicly be outed and ashamed and exposed in front of their whole community, all of her family, all of his family, and all of their friends. Nobody, probably even including her, is ever going to look at him the same way again. Bankers turn down meetings with him from here on out for the rest of his life. Business deals fall apart when the parties realize he's involved in the story. Like, this is the thing that's going to cause his friends that are currently friends to duck under corners and to avoid eye contact anytime they see him in the future. It's that kind of thing that provides for the kind of story that everybody knows and nobody's allowed to talk about when this guy and his wife show up for Thanksgiving. This is a moment where this groom is ruined. In almost a literal sense, his life is over from here. Jesus' mom hears about it. She goes to Jesus. She tells him. Look what Jesus says, verse 4. Woman, why do you involve me? Jesus replied, my hour has not yet come. Now, when he calls her woman, okay, kids, don't try this at home. He's not being disrespectful. This was, in this culture, a perfectly acceptable way to talk to another person. It would be similar to saying, ma'am. It's a term of respect, and yet most of the commentators and the scholars who look at this verse do believe that Jesus is doing something here. A lot of scholars agree that Jesus, the reason he addresses the answer to the question, woman, is that at the end of the day, it's not just a question for her. This isn't a question where he just says, mom. It's not just a mom question. Even mother, not just a mother question. He doesn't call her by name, Mary, because it's not just a Mary question. What John's rising to the surface, what Jesus wants you to see is this is not just a question that he's asking her. This is a question that he's asking you. And a question that he's asking me. Ma'am, sir, what's the question? Why do you involve me? Right here in the moment, between the asking of the question and its answer, listen, a whole world hangs in the balance. Why do you involve Jesus in the stuff of your life? I mean, maybe your crisis, whatever it is, it's not a wine crisis. Maybe it's a relationship crisis. Maybe it's a midterm crisis. Maybe it's a health crisis. Maybe you're a little like Mary, it's not even your crisis. It's a crisis of somebody near you. Maybe it's not a crisis that you're anticipating in the future. Maybe it's one you see clearly in the past. Not just a pending crisis that could ruin you, it's a past crisis that already has. Maybe it's not a crisis at all, it's just life. Getting from where you are to where you're going. You find yourself throwing up a prayer, reading through the scriptures, looking for guidance, showing up in a place like this around people like these, involving Jesus in your story. I wonder how many of us have ever paused to ask the question and answer the question. Why? It strikes me that there are several different answers to the question. Probably all across the room. Some of us, if we were to answer the question, why do I involve Jesus in my story? We would say, if we did it honestly, involving Jesus helps give me an edge. Some of us would just say, we get an edge from being with Jesus. Now think about the dating world. Think about the business world. Having Jesus on your resume can sometimes put you over some of the other competition in both of those worlds. Give you access to social circles that you may not have ever had access to before. And involving Jesus in your life can give you an edge. You ever go to a church like that, church service, singles event? Feels more like a networking event than it does a worship service. Not for you, but for some of the other people around there. That's why some people get Jesus involved in our life. We need an edge. We think he might provide it. Some of us, we involve Jesus for advice. Like Jesus is one of the people that sits at our wisdom table. He's just one of the people, but he's sitting there at our wisdom table. So we ask him about decisions that we have and things that we feel like we might need to do. And we take his opinion and our mom's opinion and our aunt's opinion and our friend's opinion. And we kind of weigh all of the opinions and decide what to do from there. We just need advice. That's why we involve Jesus in our story. Sometimes we need the assist. Most of our life depends on us, and we're good for most of it. But every once in a while, we find ourselves in a situation where we just need somebody to kind of boost us over the edge. We need the assist, and Jesus comes in for the assist for us. Sometimes it's good luck. We're afraid bad stuff will happen if we don't get Jesus involved, so we just nod to Jesus, rub the lucky rabbit's foot, and hope that everything will go okay for us today. Sometimes it's insurance. Like we're not even totally sure we believe any of this. In fact, in some cases, we're kind of sure we don't. But just in case, I'm going to show up, shut up, pay up, keep Jesus just a little bit involved, just in case it happens to be true. Sometimes it's tradition. Mama involved Jesus in her life. Her mama involved Jesus in her life. Her mama involved Jesus in her life. Like, come on, we're Americans, so we involve Jesus in stuff. It's kind of what we do. It's tradition. I mean, that's a short list. You may have others. Just wonder what would be yours if Jesus were to ask you, knowing that Jesus is asking you. The question's unanswered. Ma'am, sir, friend, why do you involve me? You understand the way that you answer that question reveals something about the nature of your relationship to him? Defines something about your identity in your eyes and his identity in your eyes. It makes a declaration. It determines some next steps for you and how you'll walk from here. Depending on how you answer the question, I don't think it's an overstatement to say, in the moment between the asking of the question and its answer, your world hangs in the balance. I believe this is the number one question that Jesus wants to ask people like us. In fact, I think there's a reason that John includes this question and Jesus asked this question in this story at this moment. It's connected to a story that John's going to tell us is the first sign, his word, not mine, that points to who Jesus is and why he's come. This question, why do you involve me? And this story that we're going to look at set the paradigm for Jesus, who he is and why he came, and the kind of story that he came to get involved in. That's what the story shows us, the kind of person, the kind of story that Jesus loves to be involved in. Jesus asked Mary, ma'am, why do you involve me? Then he says, my hour has not yet come. Now, what he's not saying is, come on, Mom, it's not time for me to do miracles. doing something totally different. It's like one of those movie breadcrumbs that you see every once in a while in a movie, in a really good movie that has a plot twist at the end. Because John wants us to see this all the way through the story, and when the plot twist comes in the story of Jesus, he wants us to look back and get it. So you remember Sixth Sense? You realize that Bruce Willis goes to dinner with his wife. She never talks to him. Then she gets up and leaves the meal and acts like he's not even there. And you see it, but you don't get it till you get it. And then you want to go back and see it again and wonder how other things you've missed along the way in the story. That's exactly what this is like. Okay, spoiler alert in the plot twist of Jesus' story. Every single time Jesus talks about his hour, he's talking about the fact that the king that's sent from God, the rescuer who came to make the world flourish, would be killed. He would die. And he would rise from the dead. And he would offer life to the people who would receive it. His hour is the hour of his death and his resurrection. Here's what's happening, and it's totally powerful in this story, okay? The Bible, and we've talked about this before, the Bible tells a story that's set between two weddings. You ever notice that? The very beginning of the Bible, there's a wedding in a garden, Adam and Eve. And the moments after that wedding are the moments where the whole world falls apart. Okay, there's a wedding at the end of the story. It's called a wedding feast that carries us beyond the end of the story that we read. And it's a picture of Jesus as a groom who displays his ability to take care of his people in one gigantic feast that goes on forever and ever and ever and ever. That's the picture the Bible paints of heaven. It's not cherubim and clouds and harps and singing and sleeping all day. Like, it's a wedding feast that goes on and on and on and on and doesn't end. God's design is that every single wedding between the two weddings would point towards the future wedding, including this wedding in Cana of Galilee. And listen, Jesus knows it. So he already has his eyes as he sits there at a wedding, looking towards the ultimate wedding. And when he says to Mary, Mary, ma'am, why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come. What he's saying is that he has on his mind what he's going to need to do in order for there to be wine at his wedding feast. To make sure that the joy never runs out and the celebration never stops for his bride. And John says it. Calls this moment a sign. Jesus is attaching a big flashing light to this sign as an arrow that points forward to his hour in order to say, this is why I've come into the world. This is what I'm doing in the world. This is what I'm involved in the world. And I want to point to it in this moment, even though it's not time for it yet. You see that? Okay, with that in mind, look at the rest of this story. Verse 5. His mother said to the servants, I love this response, do whatever he tells you to do. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Okay, big jars. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water? So they filled them to the rim. It's one of my very favorite details in the whole story. Who gets the spotlight for this moment? Who gets to participate in the process? It's not the groom, not the bride, not the master of the ceremonies, not even Jesus' mom. Who is it that gets to participate? It's the servants, the help. Tells them to grab these gigantic stone vessels for water. They were the jars that people used to wash their hands on the way into the wedding feast. That's the purpose of these jars. And he tells them to fill them up with water. Mary said, do whatever Jesus tells you to do. Servants do what servants do. They do whatever they're told to do, and they filled them to the brim with water. Okay, side note, water is not what they wanted. Water isn't even what they needed. They need and they want, what do they want? Wine. Jesus starts with ordinary water. Okay, you know where this story is going. I wonder if you've ever maybe considered that it's where your story is going too. Problem in your story is you're here, not there yet. You ask for wine. And today you sit here filled to the brim with water. You didn't want water. You didn't ask for water. You wanted wine. You asked for wine. Is it possible that what seems like insignificant obedience from these servants who do whatever Jesus tells them to do is the first step towards a moment of extraordinary significance that they never saw coming? Is it possible the same thing could be true for you? Tell you what, some of us, you're joining community groups for the very first time as a part of this series. I think that's awesome. Some of you have been in community groups for a really long time. Can I just tell you, when you get to community group this week, there's going to be a moment that's the biggest moment. Doesn't seem like the biggest moment. Every single time in community group, we ask a question, looking at the story, seeing who Jesus is, what he invites us to, what the passage says, what God calls us to, knowing who he is, knowing the life that he's invited us into. We ask the question, what's the next step that he's calling us to take? And we respond, and we start our response with the question, I will. Based on everything that I know about Jesus from this point, everything I know about me from this point, everything I know about the life that he's called me to from this point, the next step that I need to take, I will. Sometimes it seems like a silly, insignificant step. But some of us who have taken them over and over and over begin to realize that insignificant steps are often first steps to a moment of extraordinary significance. So we take them. We take them together. What seem like insignificant obedience can turn into moments of extraordinary significance when Jesus gets involved in your story. Look how their story goes, verse 8. Then he told them, now, draw some what out? Water. Draw some water out and take it to the master of the banquet. Okay, the person that's responsible for pulling the whole thing off, the servants, it's their boss. Okay, he says, take a ladle, dip some out, take it to him, invite him to take a swig. Okay, remember, these are the jars that people used to wash their hands when they walked into the feast. This new water is still gross. You fill up your bathtub with water, new water, ladle some out, take it to your boss. You better have your resume together. But you notice what they do? They do what Jesus told them to do. Verse 9, the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He didn't realize where it had come from. They didn't tell him we took it out of the hand washing jars, right? He didn't know. Though the servants who'd drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine first and the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. Let me ask you a question. Who's the you right there? Who's he talking to? He's talking to the groom, isn't he? He's talking to the guy who just a couple of verses before was right on the brink of ruin. His life was over, about to be publicly outed and ashamed. And in the place of his greatest shame, he receives public honor instead. You see that? Okay, don't miss that. Because it's every reason to involve Jesus in your story. Jesus does the work, the groom gets the credit. The praise and the honor that Jesus deserved, he willingly hands to someone who didn't deserve it, who did nothing for it, because Jesus was involved in his story. Think about what you've got in this story. You got a woman who sees a hopeless situation. And she finds hope and help because Jesus got involved in the story. You have a groom who's facing soul-crushing shame, public humiliation. He gets honor and covering and credit because he involved Jesus in the story. Everyone at the wedding gets to taste the product, but it's the insignificant, nameless servants who get to participate in the process because Jesus is involved. Abundant life, endless joy and celebration, return to the party because Jesus got involved in the story. You realize 6 jars of this size turned into wine equates to about 150 gallons of wine. Okay, perspective, 788 bottles of the very best wine for the party to continue as far in the future as the community could see. Look at verse 11. John doesn't want you to miss the point. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his, glory. And his disciples believed in him. What's glory? Doxology? It's when God shows off and shows up who he is and what he's like for everybody to see. Who is Jesus and what's he like? He's the kind of person who helps the helpless and fills the empty, covers the ashamed, honors the humiliated, gives significance to insignificant, and brings abundant life and endless joy to the party when he gets involved. So, friends, Jesus has an unanswered question that he's dying to ask you. And I want to verbalize it for him. Why do you involve him? Whether you were introduced to Jesus 3 days ago, like John in this story, or you've been around him for decades, like Mary, it's important to answer the question. And don't forget, the space between the asking of a question and its answered is a moment where our world's holding the balance. Jesus didn't come to provide you with an edge. He didn't just come for good advice or to serve as a consultant. He didn't just come to affirm religion. He didn't just come to impress religious people. He didn't just come to scratch some superstitious itch. He's not involved in the world to start a religion or be a political pawn or be rubbed like a lucky rabbit foot when we get afraid. The only reason you're involved in him in your life are those reasons. You are missing out on the very best of Jesus. He came to give life back to people who realize their life is over, to fill people who find themselves empty, to bring honor to people who are humiliated by the circumstances, by who they are and what they've done or failed to do, and to bring endless joy, hope, and abundant life to people after they're sure the party's over for them. If that's you, I got great news for you this morning. You're the reason Jesus came. He wants to get involved, but he won't get involved in a place where he hasn't been invited. Will you pray with me? Some of you came to this morning like Mary. You've known Jesus for years. Trusted the message of a Savior that was born, Christ the Lord. You've treasured it up in your heart over the years, maybe decades, at this point, and yet here you are, perhaps on the front edge of something new that Jesus wants to do in you, through you, with you. And the question bears asking again, why do you involve him? If you want to see water turn to wine, if you want to see up there coming down here, you want to see God involved in your ordinary everyday life, if you want to live with the presence and the favor of the kingdom of God here and now, whatever he tells you to do, do it. So what is it? Would you ask him right now? Would you tell him, Jesus, I want to be a whatever you tell me to do it kind of person? So this thing that you're inviting me to do, this step that you're inviting me to take, however strong, strange, however weird, however small it seems, I will. This morning, some of you came to the moment a lot more like John. This is sort of your introduction to Jesus. And maybe just like him, you had categories of who Jesus was and what he would promise. Thought he was a great religious teacher, good moral example, a big miracle worker. And he is all of those things. Those things are signs that point to something else. He came as a savior, rescuer, for people whose life is over, for people who are empty, for people who can't make it work on their own. You don't just come to Jesus and say, I need to be topped off, Jesus. Jesus doesn't move to get involved until you can admit that you're empty. When that's your answer to why you're involving Jesus and you decide to put your life in his hands, he does something extraordinary. And this is a moment for you to involve him. It's as simple as right where you sit to tell him, Jesus, I'm empty. And I need you to fill me. I need more than advice, more than an assist, more than just an edge, more than insurance, more than just good luck. I need to be rescued. And I believe you came to the earth to rescue me. You died on a cross to pay for my sin. You put it in a grave, left it behind you when you rose from the dead, and it receives the disgrace so that I don't have to. You offer me life, forgiveness, and hope as a gift that I receive in this moment. I'm inviting you to be involved. Lord, for all of us, would you let us give real thought to our answer to the question, why we involve you? And would you let this be a moment that defines our relationship, our identity, who we believe we are and who we believe you are in a way that's true, and in a way that determines our very next steps. We believe our world hangs in the balance, and we want you to know we know who you are, and we're grateful you've come for us. In Jesus' name, amen.